You dedicate your book to the unjustly incarcerated. You became a lawyer at age 39, but how did the 3 years and 3 months of incarceration change or shape your view of justice?
What I encountered in jail, it is not that I was unaware of it. I knew that poor people have a raw deal, marginalized communities don't get the sympathy of the courts often, and access to legal aid and all that is very skewed. All those things, see, one knows them in theory, and as particularly the communities I used to work with, the workers, those who are losing their lands, or those who are up against corporates for environmental degradation, or human rights violations. So I was aware of it, but when you go and see what is the human cost of it. Now, when we say that the legal justice system is not working, what is the human cost of it? The women and children, and the way people are just languishing. And one thing that I realized, and the starkest one of that was that most of the convicts there were convicts from poor rural women. Many of them were poor rural women who were the convicts, and who actually uh, did not even think of that the high courts or supreme courts could help them. It was too far away for them. In every sense of the term. So they actually literally worked themselves out of jail. After 7 years, you can opt for going to the open fields to work, and then you start getting remission for that work. And sitting in jail, one could watch them day in and day out. Rain, sun, cold, or scorching heat, whatever it is, they're going there to the fields to work. And ultimately, that was all they could rely on their labor. Like they relied on it in their life, they relied on it in the prison as well. So I think that was something which really hit, that many people still remain out of the pale of actually being able to access justice in the way we know it through the courts.
Ma'am, you grew up surrounded by women, but did your time in a women's prison make you look at women or the idea of feminism differently?
Well, I met a variety of women. I also saw women who had maybe murdered the entire family so that they could elope with a lover, or women who very aware of their sexuality and they were using it in a particular way, or they were trying to entrap somebody, or things which one the unpleasant side of women which one doesn't like to think about, but still, by and large, by and large, those were still remained exceptions. And if you leave out, let us say, the women in the NDPS cases, those related to drug offences, or prostitution, sex work, a lot of them came from crimes associated with family, crimes of passion. Those who had killed their husbands because they just had enough, or those who maybe attacked their mother-in-laws, or vice versa. I wouldn't say victims of their circumstance. I would say that these crimes all came from a certain from their situation, and really we are very far from addressing that situation. For instance, there was this woman who was in jail because she attacked her husband when she had come home with a 4-day-old child, and he wanted to have sex with her. He was drunk and whatever, and she refused, and then he went towards the elder daughter. She just took a stone and hit him. By that time, the child was 4 years old. How do we see that crime? Is it just a murder, or what is it? What is that crime? At least my feeling about the patriarchal society, and really what it means for these women who are living through it day in and day out, carrying so many burdens.
I'll come back to questions about patriarchy. The one question I want to ask you is, you spent your childhood and adolescence reading Dickens and Premchand.
Yeah.
When in prison, you read books by William Dalrymple and Naomi Klein. You also made notes for your own book. Um, Would it be fair to say that your relationship with literature has nurtured but also sustained you?
Definitely. I mean, books were we really looked forward to reading books. And first of all, whatever was there, and that is how actually I sort of struggled and partially learnt Marathi while in jail, because initially there were no other books, there were only Marathi books. It was with the struggle that we managed to get an order from the court for 5 books. So those were really very, very precious. And that was our link with the outside world. Actually, I when I wrote these sketches of these women, I seriously never thought that I would see it in print. I'm myself as surprised as everybody else that there it is as a book. It was just my way of relating with those women. I mean, I could do nothing for them. I was just observing them. I couldn't do anything for them. The moment I could do something when I was in Baikala, I started writing applications and stopped writing, writing the sketches about them, because then there was something practical you could do.
No, also, you make that very good point that you were not able to write about them because you were actually involved or you had gotten involved.
Exactly.
In the
Yeah,
cases.
yeah, yeah.
Recounting your student days at IIT Kanpur, you write, I began to understand that the substance of development was to be sought not in the balance sheets of companies, but in the living standard of the working people. Would it be fair to say that it was during this time that you became an activist?
Not an activist, perhaps. I think that would be going too far. I think that I really became more when I sort of returned back from IIT Kanpur and started engaging with workers,
Right.
construction workers, and with the textile mill workers and all that. But at least at that time, I was always thinking of the human side of it. Like what I said, it's not in the balance sheets, but yeah, my perspective was formed, and it's an irony because it was in a place where which is the sort of mecca for those who want to go for higher technology studies and all that. So yeah, so it was a little paradoxical.
Right. Uh, Trade unionism demanded a life of commitment. This is a line from your book. What made you want to take that plunge? Was it the inspiration that you drew from Shankar Guhan Yogi, or did it have more to do with the fact that for a worker, the union was everything? As you write, their identity, pride, courage, and future. What what is it that made you take the plunge?
I think for me, psychologically, philosophically, the second one is very, very important. Of course, Yogi showed me how. Now, how could I do that?
Right.
And that really showed me, because that organization was one which was not just an economic trade union, but doing many things and so on. But the basic thing that poor people find their identity in their organization. I mean, all of us, like all the time, you're being told, okay, achieve, like people like us who come from middle class backgrounds, you're being told all the time, achieve career, or as be ambitious and so on. So, one forgets that for the working people, there is no such thing as an individual identity. You actually don't exist until you have an organization, and that is when you start being visible. And being a person who always believes in collective, in collectives, in working in collectives, in living in collectives, I think that I thought was really fundamental.
Ma'am, Shankar Yogi was once arrested under the National Security Act. Dr. Binayak Sen was also in prison. When you look back, did you ever stop to think that you too would suffer a similar fate?
As a person involved in trade union movement for like 30 years now, so that was quite clear, because I saw this in the very first few years of joining the Chhattisgarh Mukti Morcha. So right in front of us, I mean literally, I mean I wasn't there when he was assassinated, but then that, and then the police firing and the cases and people going to jail for months together. And, no, that was happening when we were raising the most minimum of demands, whatever is already there in the labor laws. And small things, gate pass do, vetan slip do,
Yeah.
minimum wages,
Yeah.
ESI, PF. I mean, things which have been there for decades in the labor laws. So I was aware of that. And later on, when I went to the High Court, I was also aware that we were taking on very big corporates. I mean, whether it was Vedanta, or DB Power, or Adani, or Tata, or SR, or every case of the trade union or of the villagers against the land acquisition or against the environmental degradation, Jindal, they were all made big companies. So I did fear.
Given that people, leaders like Mr. Yogi, Vinayak Sand, that they were arrested, did you also think that you will have a similar fate?
No, I see. Anybody who's in the trade union movement knows from the first day that when you struggle, the police are going to create law and order problem. That's very well known. And later on, I mean, and we saw that. We saw his Yogi's. We saw the attacks on the leaders. We saw Yogi's assassination. We saw police firing. People went to jail for many months. Many leaders went to jail. So all that one knew was part of a movement, a trade union movement. And later on, when I went to the High Court, again we were up against very, very powerful corporates. Whether it was land acquisition or environmental issues or forest rights issues or whatever it was. So I had a whole list of. I think I was one of the few lawyers in Chhattisgarh High Court who had cases against all the powerful corporates. So I was aware that they might, that I was making very powerful enemies. But I didn't envisage this kind of thing which happened to me. It did take me a little by surprise. Of course, again, as you rightly said, after Vinayak Sen was arrested, that also I knew that, a human rights organization would be targeted. It's a crown of thorns. But then somebody has to take that responsibility, and I did that, yeah.
But while you were making these powerful enemies, did you feel afraid?
I know that, for example, some of these corporate guys used to try and approach my colleagues or my associates in the chamber to, and I know that some of my clients would tell me that they're being threatened or terrorized to take back cases and so on. I never directly personally had that experience. But yes, I was aware, for example, that my phone was being tapped. It was being tapped for a long time. I think almost as soon as I started, as I became the General Secretary of the PUCL. And people from the local intelligence would turn up at my house to ask, oh, what is happening in this case, or are you planning some kind of a meeting, and so on. I was always very open with them. So I knew, but for some reason I didn't feel afraid. I mean, and I think that was always because I felt that I was very much with the people, and what I was doing was very much legal. There was no reason for me to feel, yeah.
I want to ask you, describe Chhattisgarh as home, but it has been years since you went back there. What kind of impact has this had on your mental and emotional health?
Oh, it's like being in exile. It's terrible. It's like being in exile. I was in Chhattisgarh, say, from around 85, 86 to 2016, almost continuously. No, what is that, 30 years? 30, 35, yeah. So, for the major portion of my life. And I came to Delhi only in 2017 or so. But as you said, I have been away from Chhattisgarh now for a long time, nearly 6 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, because I was so rooted there, Chhattisgarh Mukti Morcha, all that is like almost like a family to me. So all those karyakartas, their families, my associates in the legal practice, my other colleagues of the PUCL or other organizations that I was associated with, so all of them are there. So in fact, they always joke with me and say, "You've come out of a smaller jail to a bigger jail, and when are you coming here?" So I really look forward for the day when I can go there. Um, yeah, it is like being cut off. Um, but yeah, one still has some contact at least. One can read the newspapers, one can talk on the telephone, one can even occasionally have a Zoom call. So it's not as bad as it was when it was in jail. Yeah.
Um, Members of the working class, you say, accept you if they trust your sincerity. Was that also your experience with inmates in jail?
Yes, absolutely. Because I remember initially when I went to Baikala, for the first few days when I would, when somebody would say, "You're a lawyer, na? Will you tell me about this?" And I would say, "Why don't you show me your charge sheet?" They would hesitate. And the hesitation is very natural. In jail, you see, jail is also a cruel place. I mean, you make friends, but it's also a very cruel, gossipy place where people talk about other people's crime and people talk about, oh, she did that and she did this. So people actually hide their charge sheets. They don't show anybody. They usually send it home so that nobody sees it.
Yeah.
Um, but after some time, when they realized that I don't talk to A about B's charge sheet, I mean, that was a principle I made. I will never discuss one person's case with another person. And I would never make fun of them or gossip about them or discuss about them in a personal way. So when they realized this, literally line lag gayi, they will be, everybody will be coming, "Auntie, please see my charge sheet, what is there, what is, explain to us, what are the, what should I advise my lawyer to do." They started trusting. And so then I would be busy almost every night. I mean, the lights are on 24 by 7 in the jail. So till late at night, I would be sitting and writing applications or writing letters for their lawyers or for their court or whatever. Yeah, so they did trust me.
At Yerawada, you were lodged in a high security cell meant for death row prisoners. Having suffered the same isolation and conditions, do you believe there's an urgent need for the death penalty to be abolished?
Death penalty needs to be abolished for many many reasons, and one of the most important reasons is that uh, our criminal justice system is so flawed. I mean, there are flaws at every level in the criminal justice system, that it is going to be pretty inevitable that those who are powerful or wealthy or socially privileged are never going to face the death penalty. And on the other hand, those who are not are inevitably going to face. I mean, they are the ones who are going to. So many times in a crime, I mean, for example, the two sisters who were lodged along with us, and I've written about this. And no doubt that their crime was quite horrific. But it was actually, they were the smallest pawns in a very big game. And those big people were never caught. It was only these. So this is how we are going to use death penalty. We are going to weaponize death penalty against the weaker ones. And that is simply not fair. And secondly, many of those people, and there's been some excellent studies by the group on death penalty in the National Law University where I used to teach, Professor Anup Surendranath, etc., who have actually analyzed who are the people who actually are sent to death rows. Many of them haven't had proper legal aid. Many of them were too poor to afford good lawyers, and these are the ones who end up at death row. So yes, and it's interesting that even a union like ours, uh, we we realized that, for example, in the murder of Nyogi, it was very clear that industrialists were behind that murder. But the one who was given the death penalty was the guy who pulled the trigger, Paltan Malla, and we never supported it as a union. We said, I mean, what is the point? He's just somebody who did it for a bit of money. He didn't even know who he was killing.
One question I want to ask you. You say you're a constitution abiding person, but there is in your writing a strong critique of some laws. The UAPA, for instance, you use the adjective draconian for that. Is this you have to keep walking a very tight rope between these two, between being able to abide by the constitution and yet critique the country's laws?
See, there is a difference between the constitution and the laws. And the constitution was a document which was debated by those who emerged from the freedom struggle. Maybe certain sections were not very well represented. I mean, Jaipal Singh was, for example, almost the lone Adivasi voice. Very few were really representing the Dalits. Very few represented the women. I mean, there were many people who were left behind, backward regions of the country. But still, it was still a debate which emerged about, it was laying the bedrock of how we visualized our society to come. And some very basic principles were laid down on it. When it comes to laws are things which are created later. They all need to be tested on that bed. And when I say that certain laws are draconian, they do not pass the test of constitutionality. That is why, for example, the PUCL has always challenged such act. The PUCL challenged the TADA, the PUCL challenged the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, particularly the portion about, it has challenged sedition. It has challenged, 66A. The tendency of the executive to overstep is always there. And that is where the constitution has to, or the judiciary has to step in to create a balance. I don't see there a contradiction in this. It is the fundamental rights which are primary. The restrictions are secondary. And the restrictions can never overwhelm the right itself. You can't make the restrictions so severe that there is no right remaining.
Absolutely. I want to ask you a question about Dr. Shoma Sen. How difficult would it have been if she was not next door?
I think it would have been very difficult for both of us if we didn't have each other. Because particularly isolated from the rest of the jail and having only these two sisters who, after years of suffering in jail, had become very cranky and, very difficult people. I don't think I could have survived without her, and vice versa. I mean, at least later in Baikala we were in the barracks. But at least, just knowing that there is somebody on the other side of the wall, there's somebody you will have your breakfast with, there's somebody you can share a book. I mean, all the notes which I write here were first shared with her. And, it was her encouragement also which made me write more.
How difficult was accepting the knowledge that you wouldn't be released soon?
Disbelief which I had when I was arrested. Once that went away, I realized that this is going to be a long haul. So I had sort of mentally prepared myself for the long haul, and that is why I just relied on my daughter, my friends, my colleagues in the union, that they will do whatever is best for me, but I should just not. So I deliberately used to be very indifferent to the ups and downs of my case. Oh, bail application has been moved. Oh, now it has been rejected. Oh, the bail application has been moved again in the High Court and now it's been rejected. Again, it's gone to the Supreme Court. It's been rejected. It's. I decided to myself that I'm not going to go on that roller coaster ride, and I'm just going to sort of wait and see. And I was still very lucky that I came out, I've come out, and it's very unfortunate my co-accused remained behind bars. I wish that they come out very soon.
You write that you knew that the action of courts were often prejudiced against the poor, the Dalits and the minorities, and that courts looked at crimes within the family through a patriarchal lens. How desperately does the criminal justice system need reform? That's one, and for women in particular, that is two.
See, I think, only recently, I think Justice Chandrachud brought out a booklet about gender stereotypes, which has been sent to all courts. And, that itself shows the attitude, the language which has been used, the attitude which judges don't drop from they're not outside the society, they come from the society. And so they're being patriarchal, they're usually coming from the upper castes, they're usually coming from the majority community, does definitely impact the way they look at crimes and at accused people. I'm glad that gradually the need for diversity is being recognized in the judiciary. That's one part of it. The other part of it is also that we have to give a spirited defense to these people. You see, it is the interaction of the bar and the bench which actually makes law. So it's not just the bench, but the bar also has to be very vocal, has to represent all these diversities, has to represent all these, uh, you know, these viewpoints, and only then probably judgments of that nature will start coming. So I think, and see, I'm not really a criminal lawyer. I won't be able to go into much detail of it, but I seriously think if we improve our legal aid system and we really have dedicated people doing legal aid, we will soon build up a defense, build up better defenses, build up better perspectives of defense for these marginalized and oppressed communities. And I think that would make a difference.
You say that ineffective representation is no representation at all. But the legal aid system, which you've referred to already twice and you write about so beautifully. But have things changed after District Legal Aid Defense Council has begun to be implemented in many districts?
I think so, because you see, uh, there used to be two or three major problems about legal aid. One was that people were not paid sufficiently.
Right.
So this district legal aid defense council system envisages payment even of the junior most lawyers at a level of say 40,000 rupees a month, even more, which is a reasonable amount. I mean, it's more than what you get interning with the senior lawyer. And at least, of course, there is a restriction. You can't do private cases. You can only do legal aid cases. But then that's a variety. It's like for a doctor working in a general hospital rather than working in a private clinic, that you actually will get the exposure. Um, the second problem with the legal aid system was that you could only enter it earlier when you were more than 7 years old as a lawyer. Now, usually, by the time you're 7 years old as a lawyer, you've either drowned or floated. So, and most people have lost their idealism by then. So they just want to make money. So, but this gives an opportunity for the younger lawyers, with less experience but more uh, energy and this thing, to be properly supervised by lawyers, senior lawyers, um, and yet, you know, put in their energy to be effective. So that second problem, and the third thing which I still think needs to be emphasized is that legal aid lawyers have to be accountable to their client, that is to the prisoner, not to the system. So, making sure that they know what is going on, meeting them from time to time, making sure that, you're really representing them properly, you know what is going on with them, you've explained to them what is happening in the court. So, this accountability part maybe even still has to be further emphasized. But I think it would make a difference. It needs to be implemented everywhere. I mean, at the moment it is being implemented in pilot districts. It needs to be implemented everywhere.
You write about how you were repeatedly strip searched. Do Indian prisons use humiliation as their bedrock and foundation instead of rehabilitation?
Yes, well, we are strip searched every time we go to court, or you come back, or you go to the hospital and come back, or wherever you go. I mean, after some time, one gets used to it. Uh, but yes, some people would also be ill treated. We were spared a lot of the roughness and crudity which accompanies those strip searches, which is reserved for poor persons, or people who are beggars, or people who are suspected of maybe hiding something, or smuggling in some drug, or smuggling in something. So those people would be dealt with much more brutally. So that is there. Now they claim that reformation is what what should be the thing, and you don't call them prisons, but you call them correctional services and all that. But for that, you really need a whole lot of staff dedicated to reformation and correction.
Right.
They are horribly understaffed, and whatever staff there is only on the punitive. I mean, not punitive. I mean the what do I say? Not punitive. What is the word for it? Only for the on the disciplinary side. The ones who count you and lock you and strip you and take your roll call, and so it's all that uniformed police staff.
Yeah.
But actually, a prison is supposed to have many other people as well. It's supposed to have doctors, it's supposed to have psychologists, it's supposed to have teachers, it's supposed to have social workers, it's supposed to have legal aid lawyers. I mean, you need a lot of other people to attend to the reformation. That is not given enough. Actually, they say that there is even lack of staff to do the simple policing of the jail. But the other is definitely much in short supply. There's not enough medical staff. There are not enough social workers. There are not enough people to teach if the prisoners want to improve their qualifications or just become literate. And even the NGOs which come in to maybe train are very sporadic, and they don't really see people through to a new life. And that is really very much required. So an emphasis on the reformatory staff is needed. I mean, it's just giving lip service is not enough.
This does lead perfectly to my next question, which is there are a number of the police officers and jail officials you encountered were women. I would think the majority of them were. Given that their jobs demand a certain hardness of both manner and feeling, did you feel that many of them prized kindness?
Apart from the women who it's almost all completely women. It is only when the male staff come from the main jail, like in Yerawada, come from the main jail, that the male jail officers come in. Even in Baitala, for example, if a male jail head constable or constable had to come to repair a fan or something, they always have to be accompanied by women. Yes, the job requires that they be very firm, very strict, very sometimes very rude, and so on. So that there is a mannerism which is very much cultivated. But when in fact I've devoted a section of my book to this, the bias, because when we were in the cell, we would be 24/7 have a police constable there. So they would be bored, I mean, the whole night, obviously, and they have the 3-hour shifts and all that. So many times we would engage in conversations, and as women working very hard lives, having a 12-hour shift, maybe away from their families, juggling family life and professional life, looking after children, husbands, in-laws, and all that. So it was very interesting to see how they were doing that, and they were really facing all those issues. So many a time, the longer term convicts, they would form pleasanter relationships with. And some of them were known to be very kind, actually. So, of course, there's not much scope, much you can do with the kindness. But yes, many of them, particularly the older and senior ones, they would shake a leg along with the prisoners, in a dance, or they would make some comments, or they would, ask about your families, or, So, I think there would be more of that than probably the male police would have.
You had to struggle for the smallest concessions, books, fan, water. Was there any one aspect of your incarceration that you found very difficult?
I talk about that in my epilogue, actually, the bit when in the COVID time.
Yeah.
because I was in a strange situation. I tested negative, but I had low fever and diarrhea for about a month and a half, and almost everybody thinks that there was probably a false thing, and probably I did have COVID after all,
Yeah.
because when our barrack was checked, we were some 57 of us, and 13 of them had tested positive, and many of them were just right next to me. So it's very likely that. So that was a time when we were just stuffed into one particular what was called a quarantine barrel, where everybody was sick. Nobody would come in to help, or for cleaning or anything like that, and that was really miserable, because there were 4 toilets, 3 were choked, and the place was filthy. Everybody was sick. Everybody was depressed. Um, that was the worst period, I think, of the incarceration. And also, see, at that time, fortunately, thanks to the PUCL, which had filed a petition in the High Court, we were getting telephone calls. But we were not allowed those telephone calls, because we were not allowed to step outside that so-called quarantine barrack. And every time you would go to get a test done, your that quarantine would be increased by another 15 days. So, when I was released from there and I went from there downstairs, I really thought I'm released on bail. That was the time, actually, that time my medical bail had gone all the way up to the Supreme Court and got rejected. So, yeah.
Jail authorities would cut out from newspapers articles and stories about you and the case. Was the relationship between hope and the size of the hole directly proportional?
In fact, one day there was a hole, and we went to court, and and people started congratulating me on the way, and I said, "What is it?" This is in Yerawada, and then I was told that I was permitted by the court to go and attend the last rites of my father. Uh, of course, my parents had been separate for a long time, but I was still in touch with him. And but I didn't know of it, because they cut it out. so, so it's only when I went to court that I realized, oh, this is happening. Yeah. So we were very hopeful when we saw the holes. We said, something is happening.
Even the poorest, most destitute person in this jail prefers the freedom of a release to the security of these stone walls. That's a line from the book. Do you think this is a universal response to captivity, or is it because Indian prisons in particular are no place for
No,
women?
no, no. I think this is very innate to the human being, because equality and freedom are something so basic, so basic. I mean, you take 2 small children, you give one child one toffee, you give another child 2 toffees. The one with one toffee will throw away that one toffee. You give me like that person only. No, this is how we are made. This is how we are made as human beings. And freedom is very essential to us. So actually, if you look at it in the opposite way, if we have very little freedom, you can imagine how much force is being brought upon us for us to have given up so much of our freedom. It really indicates this seen and unseen coercive atmosphere that is around us, that we have had to give up so much of our freedoms.
I wanted to ask, caste, class, race, community, all these hierarchies play a crucial role in many of the stories you write about. Women who come from the upper classes are treated more humanely, while women belonging to Dalit and OBC communities are saddled with sanitation work. Is there any chance that this system, which seems woefully biased, might change?
Well, I think there are some rumblings of change now. It has been a slow and gradual process, but I think whether it is the whole mandal upheaval which happened, whether it is the Dalit assertions which have happened, which have been reacted to by violent backlash, a lot of violence. In fact, recently I attended a book function, Manoj Mitta's book on caste pride, and that violence has only increased because the assertion is increased, and now the whole thing about caste census. You see, the invisible are being made visible slowly. All this will have an impact. Some of it will be gradual, some of it will be, explosive, can't say. But yes, I do hope, and I do find people who come from these backgrounds are also more assertive. Yes, it's beginning to be recognized. I think, first of all, the recognition that yes, this is probably one of probably the most important issue
And if you
for
were
us now.
to answer that question through prison reform, maybe, or through how prisons operate in India, what would your answer be? That, is there any chance that those caste, class hierarchies, gender hierarchies, will play a lesser role? Is that?
See, prison is a mirror only. What change has to happen in the society. Prison is a very closed society. Within prison, to make a change is virtually impossible. It's very tightly controlled and administered. But it reflects the change which is happening outside. When you probably bring in more prison staff from these communities, when social workers come in with that understanding, when more legal aid lawyers will come in with that understanding, then these prisoners will get more dignity, more appreciation, more of their issues. And because self-organizing is almost impossible. I mean, organizing is a crime in prison. The slightest help. I mean, I remember in Baikala, women couldn't get their court orders. So I wrote to my lawyer to send the court orders of some other women. I was hauled up for it. I was actually called and told that, I can't do this.
Religion has increasingly become a line that divides people in Indian society. Is this discrimination? How you just said that prisons are a mirror, but this particular question about religious distinction or discrimination, um,
It's very strange. It manifests in two opposite ways. So in the women's jail, because the people of the minorities are actually a substantial number among the prisoners, much more than their proportion in the outside society. So actually the prison, and this is from the British time probably, very easily adapts to things like Rosa, where a whole different system has to happen. The kitchen has to be started early in the morning at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. The bars have to be opened and sehri has to be served, and then and then locked again, and it means a lot of change, variation in the prison schedule, but that is done. And the interesting thing is, and many of them will get together to do roza, to do namaz, and so on and so forth. You'll be surprised at the number of non-Muslims who do roza. But then Muslims also participate in the Ganpati and Christmas. Everybody celebrates Christmas. So there is a evening out, and there is a remarkable camaraderie in all festivals almost. And I think people are quite willing to worship any god if they get them out of. But I must say, the gods are also very secular about it. Whichever community, whichever god it is, nobody ever gets them out. So, if the prison administration, and this happens more in the men's jail. You see, in the women's jail, at least the jails where I was, Yerawada and Baikala both, the overt violence. Actually, there'll be a gang war, or somebody will be murdered, or somebody would be attacked. That is much less. I mean, of course, there are fist fights, and usually the so-called kamwalis or the warders are the ones who slap or hit or beat or whatever to discipline the prisoners. But it is at a much lower scale than what happens in the male jails. And at least one incident while we were there in Yerawada was very clearly there was a sort of gang kind of situation in the male jail, where some prisoners it appears, were given a sort of tacit encouragement to attack Muslim prisoners. So it might have begun with the Muslim prisoners, but it became almost, it could have become a religious clash. And those situations are potently there. And if the people in charge allow that to happen or encourage that to happen, then we can just imagine what can happen in the jails. So it does get reflected. I wouldn't say it doesn't get reflected. In the women's jail, because we don't see violence of that nature, it isn't obvious. And because women are somewhat different. I think they're the way they behave with each other, and even the staff and the prisoners, still a degree more human than what happens in the male jails.
In so many cases you mentioned women are in jail because of crimes men have committed. But yet women without male relatives are sent to sansthas instead of being released. How much agency do incarcerated women really have?
Yeah, actually, that I think, I mean, and that is really something we need to bother about. Yeah, there are a lot of women who are virtually, I would call them legal hostages. I mean, the system has kept them hostage for the sake of their absconding husband or absconding son or absconding boyfriend or whatever, and their own role in that crime is pitifully little. I mean, they don't even know about much about the crime. Sometimes it comes as a surprise to them that such a crime was ever committed. And definitely, there is no purpose is served by keeping them further in a jail. But because offense is of very grievous nature, and they are co-accused in that offense, so they might not be able to get bail. And when you put a woman in jail, you put her children in jail as well. So actually, the entire family or the children who are outside are suffering without her. And in cases where women, for example, let's say murder their husband, they are abandoned by both sides of the family often. So they are just abandoned altogether and left to their own devices. So this is really, yeah, it's one of the most serious, and those who attend to the jails, the social workers and the legal aid lawyers, the jail staff, really should pay attention to this, and maybe permit them, like for example, to go a little out of the way and permit them to have mulakat with people who are not their family members or anybody who's there to support them. There, because of rules as to who can meet, you can meet, who you can write to. Like, you're not supposed to write to a boyfriend. You can write to your husband. You're not supposed to write to a boyfriend. No. Okay, I mean, now even this court is recognizing live-in relationships.
Remember, political prisoners, you write, often don't come with a burden of guilt. They retain their dignity and encourage others to pluck up courage. But I wanted to ask you one question: that how are political prisoners treated in these jails, in the jails that you were in? What is the real difference between a political prisoner and one who is not?
None. There is no category such as political prisoner. I think legally, apart from West Bengal, there is no concept of a political prisoner either. In fact, if anything, the prisoners who are, say in Naxal offences or under Makoka or any of the most stringent laws, UAPA, etc., they are all treated as more dangerous. So, if anything, there will be more restrictions upon. So, they have restrictions about phone calls. They have restrictions about who they can meet. They are sent with much higher security to the courts. Often they are not sent to the courts and just have to appear by video conferencing, that kind of thing. So there is no concept. When I say that, I mean those who have come to jail probably because of their social or political activities. And so that is the manner in which I refer. But otherwise, there is really no category such as that.
I wanted to ask, does the Indian legal and justice system usually favor retribution over prevention, as you also mentioned?
No, they don't. This I remark about because, many times a woman who commits suicide has before that made many complaints with the police and it has not worked. Once she dies, and if it's within 7 years of marriage, then you're probably going to round up the entire family, the husband, the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, people who are even remotely connected with it. We knew of many cases where people have come in who absolutely had nothing to do with bent of that particular daughter-in-law committing suicide at all. I mean, could not have had any connection. But because you're part of the family and that's the way the police operates, and maybe, the police, maybe the girl side in that case is a little more influential or whatever. But when she is alive, when that same daughter-in-law was alive, most likely her cases in the family court or domestic, the whole concept of the Domestic Violence Act was to avoid only having a criminal remedy, was to have a civil remedy. Let us try and sort this out before it becomes a criminal case. We just have not made that effective. We have just not tried to make that effective. The root cause is not being recognized, not being dealt with. So it is only recognized when something extreme like a death happens.
At Baikala, you were referred to as Mao, or rather, you responded to Mao. How did that make you feel?
well, everybody is referred by the different 302 Bengali UT Bengali this thing then Mocha Mao Naxal Itar means everybody else. So that is how we everybody is referred to, and yeah, you fall in those categories whether you like it or you don't like it, and that is what you're accused of.
Can you tell us a little bit about the cases that came to you as Vakil Auntie? Because we get Yerawada, but we don't get so much about Baikala. So if maybe you could mention something. And how disappointing was your low success rate?
So somebody would come to me and say that, please, auntie, please, my lawyer never arrives on time. So, please write me, arji so that, I can give it to the court. And so there would be all kinds of arjis. There would be arjis because, somebody's child has got left behind. A 1-year-old child has been left behind with a neighbor, and, she's like dying to get that child back. That was one of the few success stories. Actually, that child did come back. And somebody wants to change their lawyer, somebody wants a video conferencing with their husband or their son, or somebody who's a co-accused in a different jail. So maybe some application has to be written to the jail authorities, or to the jail authorities, to the court, even to the High Court. I mean, sometimes I've written even to the High Court, registrar of the High Court, saying, my case is pending since so and so, and I don't know what is the status of the case or when is the next court date of hearing. So all kinds of many people had not got copies of their charge sheet. Many people did not even know whether their charge sheet has come or not, and whether they were entitled to default bail. Ultimately, what I got was default bail. But my lawyers were alert on that issue, and they took up that matter right up to the High Court. Many of them, even if they were aware that they should get a charge sheet within 90 days, had not got the charge sheet, and there was nobody there to move their default bail application. Then there would be people who have got the bail, could not get a surety, or could not arrange for the cash. So, converting a surety to, particularly a Bangladeshi woman or a person from outside the state, where do they get a surety from? So, applications to convert it to cash bail, to reduce the amount of cash bail, to so many. So there were all variety of applications for medical bail, for later on for COVID bail. I have written literally hundreds and hundreds of, and of course the as I said, the success rate was spectacularly dismal. I hardly succeeded in 2-3 cases. Some case I managed to get the copy of the charge sheet. In some case I managed to get a co-accused who had not been produced for a long time to be produced. Transfer from one jail to another, little successful in those. So, but the reason why it didn't disappoint me was that it was not as if my success rate was very spectacular outside either. When I was representing the workers also, more time there would be failure than success. When I was representing the villagers against land acquisition, more times failure than success. Environmental degradation, coal mining and all that, more times failure than success. Forest rights, human rights. So, fortunately, I'm used to failure. But I still think it's important to fight, not give a walkover. Okay, we are a weak side, but we need to play.
You said once, if you try to be safe and be in the middle, you will never succeed. You still stand by that still?
Yes, of course. It depends what you call the middle. I feel that I need to be on the side of people, and I've chosen to be on that is a choice. That is a choice I've made. That I would prefer to be on the side of the workers or the union, or I would be on the side of communities vis-a-vis a big corp, or I would be, I would be on the side of the underdog. So that is a choice one makes. That is a choice one makes. And I remember in my very initial days in the High Court, when I was very fresh in the High Court, I remember. So there was a matter and I argued very passionately. And I think the judge must have been a little surprised and also pleased and he asked me, "Madam, do you only appear for workers?" And I said, "Yes, sir." When I came out, almost all the lawyers jumped at me and said, "Why did you reply like that? That's not the correct reply to give." I said, "Why?" So they said, "No, no, no, like it makes you look very biased." So I said, "Oh." Well, in that sense, I continue to remain biased.
Great answer, man. I just wanted to ask, 3 years, 3 months is a long time. How different was the India that you walked freely back into? Uh, Perhaps not entirely freely, but at least when you were released, what was the kind of India that you saw, and what did freedom feel like in this country?
I came out, but in an alien city. I was very fortunate to be supported by a lot of people, my friends, by other lawyers, by other unions, and therefore I am able to exist and survive and still have a community here. But yeah, it is very different. A lot of things happened when we were in jail. The Modi government came in for a second term. Many laws were brought. The farm laws were brought. The labor codes were abolished. I mean, the new labor codes were brought, and the way has been paved for repeal of the old labor laws. There have been some very big changes. We've been reading them through newspapers, but when I come out, I do see. I mean, it's a much more communally polarized society that we have come out into. I would say, I mean, a society where a lot of um okay, how do I describe it? A lot of space has been lost. Uh, a lot of democratic space has been lost. Whether in the universities, whether in the press, whether in and I really miss it. Of course, I'm not being able to go back to Chhattisgarh, which is where I would be able to see the real changes. But yeah, I do feel things have changed. Things have changed.
Some small questions. You rightly point out that it's not easy for a convict or even an under trial to get it, even the most informal one. How did imprisonment affect your work and career? Do you think?
See, I was always, I mean, I never really had a career to speak of. From the age of 25, I was at first a trade unionist and then a lawyer, and I was most of the time supported by my trade union organization. In fact, the first formal job I did was with the National Law University as a visiting professor.
Great.
So, yeah, well, now that I've come out, I doubt that any university would dare to make me a professor again. Though, of course, I've done some online lectures and so on. Fortunately for me, a lawyer's profession is an independent profession. So, and there have been some remarkable, lawyer colleagues here who have really encouraged me to work as a lawyer. So I'm able to do that. And as far as the unions are concerned, they still desperately need lawyers. So that is still there. But yeah, I mean, I can imagine somebody who had a more formal, job would really find it very difficult after coming out of a jail and in an unknown city to rebuild your life. And at the age of 61, I mean, it's it's not simple. One doesn't have the same energy as a youngster would have. One person we lost altogether, Father Stan.
At one point, you ask, in a Kafkaesque situation, what else does one do but laugh? Do you still feel like you're
Oh
trapped
yes, oh
in a
yes.
bit of a Kafkaesque nightmare?
Yes, it very much is. And yeah, I do think so. Yes, I actually I hadn't read much of. See, I didn't never had time to read. To be really frank,
Yeah.
to read much. But I have I ordered his short stories, and there's one which is my favorite, which is called "In Front of the Law." There's a really excellent small writing of his, which is called "Before the Law." It's very small. It's just 2 pages, and it is chilling because this man goes before the gatekeeper and says, "Please let me in, please let me in." and it's delayed and delayed and delayed and it delayed and he's never let in. And the gatekeeper is getting older and older and he's getting older and older. And then later on, he says, but why is nobody else coming to this gate? So he says, oh, this gate is only specially for you. Everybody else is at the other gates. So it is such a scary thought. And I think this is really, really the fate of many prisoners.
Is that Kafka line, before every law there is a gatekeeper? Is it from these two pages?
Yeah. It says, before the law stands a doorkeeper.
Before
And-
the law stands the door.
And there are doors and doors and doors and gates and gates and gates, and you can just see them stretching away to eternity. You never know where is the end of the tunnel.
And also the light at the end of the tunnel is usually of incoming trains. just two more questions, ma'am. You missed out on some crucial years of your daughter's life. How did incarceration impact your relationship?
My whole purpose of coming to Delhi was to be able to, after a long time, spend more time with her, to be with her, to support her when she entered into college. Because, like all activist children, she had a tough time in her childhood. Unfortunately, that was not only cut short, then she had to suffer a lot. There was a media trial going on. I mean, I was the only bread earner, so now, of course, friends and colleagues supported her. But and then there was COVID. She was left all alone in COVID. Then she had to struggle and get admission on her own and graduation. It was a very difficult time for her, very traumatic time for her. And the worst thing would be that, for her, I mean, she was in Delhi, I was in Pune, and she would hardly be able to maybe come once in 3 months. And then oftentimes it would be, there would be a lot of obstacles to her even coming and meeting. She had to first go to the NI office and get some permission, and it was very long-winded. And then, I would try to advise her to come on a Friday so that, she could maybe meet me on a Friday or Saturday, and then again on a Monday, because you can only meet once a week. So that way she could combine 2 visits. And it would be, just seeing her through that glass, or, I mean, it was really bad for both of us. And as for letters, the letters take a long time, because even if you write by speed post, it would take a week within the jail for it to be censored and given to you. And then the reply would similarly be censored and sent out. So it would take a week maybe for the letter again in the jail before it left the jail. So in this manner, I mean, the whole thing would, take 20 days to reply to a letter which had come, and there was no other means of communication until later in the COVID, when we fortunately started getting those 10-minute phone calls once a week. So, by the time you replied to something, the moment had passed. So, I would get these very, desperate and miserable and angry letters, and by the time I replied back, I mean, I didn't know what I was replying to.
Yeah.
And
my last question to you is this: how hard is it to be a Marxist in this day and age? Also, if the world in its present condition is not one that human beings deserve, does Marxism offer us a way out?
Yes, it's very hard because it's very unfashionable nowadays, I think. Because nobody wants to talk about, good old class politics. But as a person working with the working class, I think it is still very relevant. Of course, Marxism has to be applied in the times and the context. It has to, and this is what I admired about Niyogi, that he was a Marxist who understood Marxism in the context of those Chhattisgarhi miners, and in the context of Chhattisgarh, in the context of these contractual miners there, and therefore he was able to make that idea into a human force. and an organization, and a source of power for the people. So I think it's possible. I know that Niyogi. I mean that our organization is now very in a weak condition, and I think most trade unions, most working class organizations are in a very weak condition at the moment. Um, but I also see a lot of hope. I see that the word socialism is no longer a dirty word in America. I see that unions are again coming out from the ashes in the West. They and in the least likely place, like for example the app-based workers or the gig workers who really don't have an employer to speak of. You're seeing quite remarkable organizing and quite remarkable uh, unions coming out. So I'm hopeful.
I'm hopeful is a great way to end this interview. Thank you so much.